All right. Hello and welcome, everyone. So today we are doing what we did for primary weapons, which is talk about the 5 weapons that I think are going to be very good going into the Sisters of Parvos update. And instead, we're going to do that for the secondary weapons. Shock and surprise, I know. So we're going to be talking about 5 with a few honorable mentions. Secondary weapons that I think are going to be really good and maybe, some of the best going into this new meta. With that, it is really important to note that I am leaving off 2 very important pieces of this list. The first of which is the Kuvanukor. Kuvanukor is getting nerfed, so showing you how it is now really is not going to do anything to demonstrate like what it's going to be like after it's nerfed. And while I still think it's going to be absolutely incredible, it's really not worth being on this list because also everyone knows that the Kuvanukor is the best secondary weapon in the game at this current time. It's really just a fact. It's really just a thing that everyone knows. So I really don't need to go over it here. The other weapon that we're not going to be talking about here, but that I am, of course, going to mention, is the Piranha Prime. The Piranha Prime has a huge build around utilizing its gimmick and arcane pistolier in order to have unlimited ammo and fire a lot of rounds basically anywhere and in a nearly unlimited fashion. That is potentially extremely good with all of this new power that we're going to be getting. But because it is such a heavy build around that requires so much from people, I really didn't want to include it in this list because it's pretty particular. Very few people, I would say, tend to have just a full set of Arcane Pistolier hanging around, as that is a pretty hard set to acquire. Not to mention, like, the Piranha Prime, just, not that popular of a weapon in general, and like I think it's vaulted right now as well, too. So we're going to leave that one off the list as well and focus on some more acquirable things that people can get right now. With that, the first one we're going to talk about is probably the weirdest one on this actual list, and that is the Epitaph. So the Epitaph is a very weird weapon, and it has some particular advantages going into this update, and it's that it's a very, very strange setup. I think it's going to benefit a lot from these new mods. So first and foremost, this, and also we're doing the thing in this video as well where I'm toning down the mods to be like the lower version of what their better versions will be. So we're going to be getting Galvanized Diffusion, which is a purely better mod than Barrel Diffusion, but it has a slightly lower starting number. So I have tuned down my mods appropriately, and they're actually all lower than the brand new versions will be, but lower is better than them just being the regular ones still, in my opinion. So we're doing that in this video. And this is generally, I would say, the build that a lot of people will just immediately go to on the Epitaph. This is one of the weapons that can use Hemorrhage because it has a guaranteed impact proc on every charged shot. And of course, it has the fire rate just low enough as that you're going to get that 70% chance to get a slash proc whenever you fire it. And then that, of course, counts for every single multi-shot from this weapon. So you're going to tend to inflict a lot of slash procs on your enemies and do a lot of damage to single targets. Now, that's all fine and good. If you need to deal damage to a single target, this weapon is good at that. It is a solid weapon for doing that, and you can inflict a lot of slash procs on the enemies that are vulnerable to that. However, the build that I think is going to be good in this next patch is this weird shit right here. So this build would utilize the new Condition Overload mod, which is Galvanized Shot, and whenever you get kills, you would get a huge amount more damage, and this is not a crit build, but it still uses Hemorrhage. Now, those are weird things to put together, because the charged mode of the uncharged mode of this has terrible, terrible, terrible crit stats. Like, we're talking 1-2%, absolute unusable garbage crit stats. However, it does have an 8-meter AoE, which is extremely useful whenever you're going to be getting the huge damage buffs from the new Arcanes and from Condition Overload, because the thing that the Uncharged Shot does do is always proc cold, and in addition to that, it is blast damage. So when we do blast, always cold, and viral, and heat all together, that's a lot of available statuses, and we can do some really, really significant damage that way in a large AoE to big groups. Combine that with the ability to take out hard targets, because our base critical chance is still 48%, which is nothing to sneeze at, and our critical multiplier is 2.6, which is also still quite good. So if we find a hard target, we can apply a bunch of status to them, and Viral is going to make our slash procs deal way more damage, and then we're going to be able to charge attack into them, get a slash proc, and just watch them melt. If they've got too much armor to be taken down by the just raw damage that we're going to be outputting, then you can just still use Hemorrhage to get straight at the heart of the matter and skip the armor. I think that this is actually going to be a pretty compelling build, and it's probably going to be the first thing where I'm going to re-rank Epitaph and put the forma that I'll need for the galvanized shot in, and just to see what's what and see how it works. This is actually maybe the build I'm most excited to try out whenever the new update drops in, after I farmed all the necessary arcanes, of course. But yeah, just to show off what this does right now, I think even right now, in like mid-low level areas, this is already quite strong. Because these are our usual level 80s here, and you can see that you can very easily eliminate the big boys and then apply a bunch of status to the other enemies. And at these hard targets, you can still just give them some slash procs, and they'll melt. And because we have that innate punch through as well, like, we're still going to be getting through this hard armor. And of course, it's also crowd control, as you'd expect. Yeah, it's really actually not even bad, even in its just like, completely like so much worse than it will be state. Because like the amount of additional damage that we'd be getting from all of the new effects is just absolutely outrageous in that situation. But I really do think that this build has a lot of potential with the new mods and is not something that should be ignored. I know the Epitaph is a bit of a pain to acquire because it's from Void Storms, but it may end up being extremely worth it. Now, moving on, we probably have another weapon that everyone has forgotten about, and that is the Sepulchrum. Now, the Sepulchrum is not without its problems, mostly due to its exceedingly long reload speed, but it runs a pretty basic build. This is just, super normal stuff. You're going to get the Arcane, and you're going to get the new multi-shot mod, and you're pretty much just going to call it a day on this weapon, unless you're going to go the full whole hog and go with Arcane Dexterity and drop Hornet Strike, and then add in of course, the Condition Overload mod, and you can do that whole build with this, of course, as you can do with any secondary weapon, I will honestly say, going forward. But just on the basis of actually just only using the Sepulchrum, I think this is going to be pretty strong, and the reason I think it's going to be pretty strong is that right now its damage output is quite respectable, and whenever you increase its damage output by the huge numbers we're going to be seeing off the Arcane, and this weapon can still kill higher level enemies fairly easily, I think it's actually going to be quite good. And the natural AoE is, of course, always helpful. So the Sepulchrum is going to be pretty solid, I would say. It also has the alternate fire, which I will do my best to show off here. It just requires a certain amount of kills, and then you go into this mode and fire some missiles, which are pretty good. Like, it's a nice alt fire. It's a little awkward to use. It's much more awkward than its like sister weapon, the Trumna, but it's like absolutely reasonable. Then this very long reload is the kind of big downside here, but the actual damage output of the weapon, I think, is pretty solid. Like, this weapon wouldn't have to reload or even probably get halfway through its magazine did we have the new mods on it, or should we have the new mods on it. So I think it's pretty compelling, and the solid AoE from the missiles, I think, is also going to be pretty nice depending on the type of content that you're looking to do, and also the kind of weapon that you want to be using. Like, this is a very chunky weapon that can hit you, like, good groups, especially at lower levels. This is going to hit a lot of guys and do a lot of work in hallways. Moving on, we have a maybe the cop-out on this list. I said I wouldn't mention the Kuva Nucor. However, let us not forget that the Atomos exists. The Atomos is still very much a weapon, and it's not being nerfed, and its primary damage type is heat, which is still extremely good. So should DE decide to extremely outside the realm of what they've said, nerf the Kuva Nucor, the Atomos will still be here for us, and it's going to get all the same buffs as the rest of the secondaries, Uses, the regular build that you'd expect. Also, of course, while we're here, I am going to mention that this is a 2-forma build for this weapon, and this is the single forma build for this weapon. If you are a newer player, this is very accessible early on. If you're looking for something to, melt motherfuckers with, this is going to be a good go-to. But we will show the full build here, as this is going to be, Steel Path era stuff. Yeah, I mean, this weapon, it's Kuva Nucor light. It's Kuva Nucor, but just not quite as good. It's not going to melt your heavies as fast. It doesn't have the benefits of being a Kuva weapon. It has, there are disadvantages to it as compared to the Kuva Nucor. It's got less range, and it's still this effect, right? It still burns these guys to death. They still just get murdered. The reload's a little slow. I'm not going to pretend it's the most optimal thing ever, because we know it's not. But it still melts guys, and it still melts groups, and it will consistently do that, and from everything that we can tell, it's not going to get touched or nerfed. So if you still have an Atomos kicking around, or if you're a newer player looking for something to invest in, this is probably a pretty safe bet, as it does have very usable builds that you can get early on and move into late game if you really enjoy the Atomos. With that, let's talk about one of the newer, more exciting weapons, which is the Catabolist. Now, the Catabolist has an analog in the Phantasma in the primary slot, but this weapon has, again, a very basic build that is going to change in the ways that you would anticipate whenever this new update comes out, switching in Galvanized Diffusion, etc., etc. But this is an overload of statuses that you are just applying a hilarious amount of and watching all your opponents burn to death. It does not give a shit about armor. It doesn't really care about much of anything. It has the corrosive innately, of course, which is amazing. And this just melts fools. Take with that its reload is an AoE grenade that can clear out fodder enemies, and you get a very, very deadly weapon that most enemies don't stick around to see the rest of their friends die. One of the things with this weapon is that you can actually just kind of sweep with it. Because you apply so much status, the enemy will actually effectively be dead before they actually perish. You saw that guy just evaporate. That guy's dead. And that guy, you see the critical mass happen of the heat procs, and they're just already dead long before you stop pulling the trigger. Yeah, it's just a melt ray. You just put all the heat procs on them. Things don't survive that. If something is a very, very high level, even if we're talking about, let's say a level 700 enemy or whatever, you're going to shoot a clip at them. They're going to have 500 heat procs, and they're not going to live through that. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, the Catabolist, very, very good, super good weapon going into this here. I think that the reload AoE is going to be particularly more useful with the boosted base damage, and I think that's going to see the most improvement on this weapon. Honestly, the percent up base damage is going to make this stronger, but for what it effectively does, it might not actually change much, because most things you run into, again, evaporate when they are touched by this. And last, we have Mushroom. Now, this is a Sporelacer Stitch Haymaker, and it's the Mushroom gun. It's what it is here. This is one of the newer kit guns. It runs Pack Seeker, like you'd imagine, and then otherwise, it is the regular build that you use on secondary weapons that is going to transfer into the pretty obvious build that you use on secondary weapons. Shock and surprise, I know. This is also not a shock and surprise, I know. A big AoE explosion gun that is just strictly going to get stronger. Being a kit gun, it of course does have the inherent advantage of having access to Pack Seeker. This is a considerable advantage because these projectiles that burst out of headshot kills are fairly deadly and are going to increase your damage fairly significantly. And remember, the kit guns are going to have a second arcane slot, so you're going to be able to use the Pax Arcanes and the new Arcanes together. So that'll be super sweet. A thing that I do really want to test also, by the way, is Pack Seeker. These will seek out heads. I don't know if it'll work or not, but if these count as the weapon's kills because the arcane is in the weapon, and this gets headshot kills, it might stack the headshot kills arcane, which would be potentially super nutty. So that's a consideration to make here as well. That might make this a little bit of a more interesting choice. With that, it's gonna clear the test pretty much like you've seen so far. It's gonna blow these guys up. They're gonna die. It's pretty much what you'd anticipate. One of the big things with this weapon is that generally the thing that you're going to want to be careful of is that you are going to want some kind of primed sure-footed effect or like a Rhino iron skin whenever you're using this, because it will blow you away otherwise. But yeah, you just get to mushroom dance these opponents. They die from this. The reload's not too particularly long, and this is one of the longer reload, or this is, well, I think this is the mid reload version of this weapon, I believe. But yeah, it's super good. Once again, for anyone who is curious on the parts, it is Sporelacer, Stitch, and Haymaker. I'm quite happy with it overall, and it seems like it's going to be super strong whenever we get these buffs. So yeah, you'll notice a trend between the primaries that I think are going to be good and the secondaries that I think are going to be good, and it's that most of them are either a hilarious amount of status being applied to the targets you're shooting, or the weapon explodes or is otherwise AoE. It turns out that is kind of what makes a good gun in Warframe, so that's what I expect to be good going forward. But yeah, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.